I
Oh,
just did
you're
it.
recording.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Here we go.
All
Sorry,
right.
Kate.
Right. So now at 10:04, we'll call it order. And did you want to call the roll for me?
Yes. Bill, are you prepared or?
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay, do the roll.
We know we have Kate.
Chairperson Bush, get the name right. I always mess that name up.
I'm here. Yeah.
Right. Mr. Gillette,
Present.
Ms. Kennison,
Present.
Mr. LeBlanc,
Present.
Mr. Schuyler,
Schuyler, present.
Schuyler, Miss Seelman,
Present.
Miss Waldron,
Present.
and Mr. Genovese.
Present.
Okay, everyone's here. Great.
Ah, awesome. Okay. Then let's go to the minutes. If everybody on the commission has had a chance to review the minutes of May 27th. Can I get a motion, or are there any amendments? Any changes?
I'll move. This is John Schuyler. We accept the minutes.
Do we have a
Second.
second?
This is Diane.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And abstentions?
I abstain.
That's Tony?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think, commissioners, it's probably best if we identify ourselves when we're voting, or individually like that. All right, so first we have the city of Derby. Mayor, oh boy, if you could help me with pronouncing your last name.
It's Doug Gillette. I got a note for the record that we're bond counsel to the city, so we need to recuse ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Doug. And Mayor, if you could tell us who you have with you today?
How you doing, man? My name is Mayor Richard Zekin. I have my chief of staff, Andrew Backlett, and my acting finance director, Keith McLivery. And John Acaballo is our auditor. He's on the line too. And
Okay.
Barry Hardy for financial advisor.
Yes. Barry
Okay.
Bernardi here.
So, just before we start, I do have another commitment at noon, so I'm putting a hard stop on the meeting, at least for me, at noon. And we have another community coming in later. So I would appreciate it if we can try and wrap up anything we have to discuss on Derby by 11. So with that said, Mr. Mayor, I believe you sent us a presentation that you may want to run through to outline where you are, how we got here,
Yes.
and where you are.
Yes, ma'am. The city of Derby is completely committed to our plan to get Derby back to where it was prior to my being elected. I'm going to refer everything over to my Keith McLivery so we can go through the presentation for you, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
And then we're, like I said, I'm 100% committed to this plan and that what we've been doing. So here's Keith McLivery, man.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present our plan to you and kind of show how we got here and what we've done to recover and what else we're doing this current fiscal year to restore a positive fund balance. I sent the presentation to you, a PowerPoint. I believe Bill forwarded it. It's dated the 16th. We'll go through some of this quickly just to give you the backdrop and then open up. We have John Acaballo, our auditor. He was here, who's been instrumental in us correcting the recommendations and implementing the recommendations from the auditor. And Barry Bernardi is here to help with any questions regarding our presentation that you're going to see today was presented to rating agencies. And we're actually very honored to still be an A+ rated community, considering we had a negative fund balance. But in short, how did we get here? We got here because of a mistake in finance. This wasn't a conscious effort to artificially suppress the mill rate. There was a clear mistake made in finance, in that we are an alliance district, and we have the paperwork that shows when in 16-17, when the alliance district was awarded, the sum was included in the educational cost sharing number. So what happened was, when the tax board and the finance office developed the budget, they put in the revenue side the combination of educational cost sharing plus alliance, which was a 6.8 for education cost sharing, 1.2 for alliance, and they booked the revenue, but they never booked the expenditure side for the alliance. And what happened was, because there was a lack of timely reconciliation between the board and the city during that period of time, this was not detected until the next year's budget was already adopted and implemented. That's what happened. I wish it was a more elaborate problem. It came down to that simple document, which we pulled out, and we saw how the finance director at the time, which was 2 finance directors ago, booked the revenue for the alliance grant. And the trickle down effect was, we were short that 1.2 million each of that fiscal year and the subsequent fiscal year, 16, 17, 17, 18, and that as a result hurt the fund balance, because we were short on funds for expenditure side. In addition, at the same time period, some of the revenue they booked for the formula grants were overestimated, and I don't think that was a conscious effort to artificially inflate the revenue. I just don't think due diligence was given to the most recent revenue figures that were coming out of the biannual legislation at the time. The third element that hurt us was our medical costs. We're self-insured. So as most of you who know that are self-insured plans, on a 10-year average, you tend to win. But every 10 years, you get that catastrophic year where you better have enough reserves to cover that year. And that year for us was 17-18, where we actually switched carriers. And at the tail end of the last year with the previous carrier, we had the highest quarter of claims that we'd seen in the prior 7 years. And when we peeled away that onion, it was pretty logical what happened. I don't think we, as a city, planned for it, but everyone and anyone who needed a hip surgery, a knee replacement, any major surgery went and got it in the last quarter of the year in which we were with the previous carrier. And as many times as the city presented that it was like coverage and then the next carrier was going to provide the same coverage, the fear of the unknown is a powerful element, especially when it comes to people's health and well-being. And there was a mad dash for elective surgeries. And we hit the stop.
Are you, I thought you said you were self-insured.
I did.
Then
So
I'm not sure I understand what the carrier has to do with it.
So when you're self-insured, you pay up to the stop loss.
Okay, so you went over the stop loss.
No, we hit the stop loss on 9 people. So
Okay.
what happened
Right.
in that?
Thank
So
you.
understand, right? Okay.
Yes.
So that happened all in 17-18. So it was a perfect storm, and it resulted in a negative fund balance. And as John will get to on one of the next slides, he had to do a restatement because there was an issue with accounts payable and cutoffs. So to give the quick backdrop, we recognize the problem and we're taking the problem head on. We own it and we're fixing it internally with incremental tax increases, restructuring what you'll see in the next several slides, restructuring our debt, making management changes. We adjusted our long-term obligations. We sold our properties that were on our books. And the biggest one is we are captured in our grant list, meaning the next slide, you'll see here that from 2015 to 2018, there's a slow shift as a percent of the ownership of the grant list is going more and more towards residential. And our commercial percent is going down. And this was prior to what we're facing now in COVID. We all don't know what tomorrow holds for that. But you'll see here that we have very incremental increase in our grant list. The biggest thing waiting is the south side of Main Street, which is a 14-acre parcel of land at the confluxes of 2 rivers. We'll get to that later. But my point in this slide is to show you more and more of the burden is being absorbed by the homeowners. Now, with that said, Derby taxpayers pay their taxes. And despite us going up 2.5 mils and 2 mils over the last 2 years, on the next slide now, you'll see that we tend to hover around 98% collection. The year we went up by 2.5 mils, we hit 99.6%. That people pay their taxes in town. Now, there was a lot of anxiety and angst and some bloodbaths in firehouses over the discussion of what happened, what went wrong, and the fix. They weren't happy as taxpayers because they feel it was a mistake and they wanted blood. So they still paid their taxes. This year, even with the executive order where we could go to October, we don't see any downtick in our year-to-date collections. So for Grand List 19, we believe we're going to hit into the 98% range as well without a problem. So I show this because what we did from 19 to 20, recognizing we had a shortfall in the fund balance, we did a 2.5 mil increase. And then this past year, we did a 2 mil increase, which shows the board's support what we were doing. The town taxpayers, they're paying their taxes, and the recovery plan is on its way. The next slide, 8-point recovery plan. This was a plan that we developed when we got the restatement of the fund balance and we had that negative $2.5 million balance. We had to come up with a recovery plan. This plan was accepted by both boards, the legislative body and the fiscal body. It was also presented to the rating agencies who actually applauded us for it, and that's why we only saw a downtick of 1 notch. So the first thing we did, next slide, debt restructuring, was with Barry Benarby from Phoenix Advisors. We looked to restructure the non-sewer debt for both 19, 20, and 2021. We were able then to take that savings in the budget and shift it towards the fund balance replenishment, which was 1.5 million last year and 1.5 million this year. Hard numbers in the budget. So 1920 had a 1.5 million line item for the fund balance replenishment, which is part of the recovery. And the current fiscal year we're in now has a 1.5 million for the recovery. The next slide. While this sale of assets, we had 2 parcels. The Barker property, which was worth $450,000, and Commerce Park, which is worth $350,000. While we had it as part of the plan, we did not budget it. So the $450,000, it actually turned out to be $395,000 for the Barker. When it came in, it was unanticipated revenue. So it's going to go right to the bottom line and towards the fund balance replenishment. The $350,000 for Commerce Park, while it wasn't sold prior to the close of last year, it will be in this year's numbers as unanticipated revenue. We have some vacant residential properties that we've acquired over tax lien sales and over property which they defaulted. Those are on our rolls. We're looking to reduce density and take advantage of the opportunity. So we're not just selling them to put 3 or 4 families back in. We're looking at some demolition and some we may sell depending on the cost of renovating. Next slide, mill rate. As I shared earlier, the tax board in 1920 took the firm stance that we had to recover from our negative fund balance, and we had to not only do the things like debt restructuring and sale of some assets, but we had to put it in the mill. We had to make it part of the mill rate. And what we did here was they agreed to go up 2.5 in 1920, and they went up 2.0 mils in 2021. Now on this slide, as we all know, as finance directors, there's not really a direct correlation between municipal budget increases and CPI, but there's a conceptual component to that where if you take a person and you say, look, the city didn't raise the mill rate for 3 years. Costs were going up in those 3 years. Collective bargaining increases were going up those years. We had increase in medical, but the tax board did not raise taxes for 3 years. Even if they went CPI, for that same period, it would have been a 6.5% increase. And our mill increase for that period was 6.35. It was more to put it into terms that were relatable to an average person. It was not to try and shelter from what caused it, but it was more to make it palatable and understandable. The tax board right now is committed to keeping that 1.5 million in the budget for next year. So I'm very happy they're doing that. We have Rich Cinch on the phone if you have any questions. For next slide, for long-term costs, our pension is one of our flagship items in the city. There's no doubt about it. Despite having a mayor maybe a decade ago who wanted to raid it and do what the state was doing and do what other certain municipalities were doing, the board stood firm, and we keep it locked up. No one can touch it. And we were funded at 86% going into this situation we were in. We had Rich run quick numbers, and we took the annual contribution of $740 and we reduced it to $200,000 for 18-19 and 19-20, with the commitment that it's going to go right back up to the recommended funding level for 21. The savings there was helped to offset the fund balance replenishment. We recognized what was the liability and what was the offset. Well, for every 540 we didn't fund, we were going to hit 2 to 3% downward adjustment in the percent of funding level. So we recognized we were going to take a 4 to 6% hit on the 86% funding, get into the low 80s, and then recover. This was not taking into account any market performance that might help us or hurt us. The offset was for year 3 and out, they're going to have to make an additional contribution of approximately $60K. Now this gets done every 2 years, so that may change. But the concept was the cost benefit included a cost of $60K for each additional contribution for the next 10 years. So my point of sharing that detail was in the thought pattern developing the plan, we did apply logic and apply rationale, and we totally understood the offset to what we were doing. So Rich Sins from Hooker and Holmes is here to talk about that. On a tax sale, the tax sale has something the legislative body had done 3 years prior to the situation we were in, but they decided to do another tax sale, and we estimated about $1 million would be coming into the general fund over a 2-year period. We're currently at about 540, and we're in the process of doing another sale for Grand List 18, excuse me. That will be coming up in the next couple of months. This is the meat and the potatoes. Part of why we went wrong was we have some internal issues, as you saw in the management letter and the recommendations that were prepared by the auditor. In addition to the annual management letter, we also engaged him in a best practices audit in which he kind of dissected more what actually went wrong. And I sent you that report last night. That was done in July of last year, where he took the management letter and put specifically the items that impacted what happened to us. So we actually have executed more than half of those recommendations. The problem that not the problem, but the fact of the matter is many of those corrective actions were implemented from December of 19 till now. So when we got the 18-19 audit, we were already halfway through 19-20. But you will see tremendous progress in the implementation of the corrective actions for those management letter items. The truth of the matter is that management letter has had those findings for years. We had the same hurdles everyone else had. Boards won't approve staff won't hire new staff, additional staff. So the mayor restructured the finance department, where the finance department was really, quite honestly, it was 2 clerks and a finance director, and we were finding each day they were spending almost an hour and a half on mail. Their priorities were not in the right order, so we restructured the finance department. We brought in an additional person under the finance umbrella who was basically in the community development, but now they're part of finance. They help with reconciliations. The tax board, the legislative body approved the bookkeeper. The city had no bookkeeper, and that was part of the problem in the timely reconciliations. So we are on the road to recovery for that, in that we added additional staff. The finance department now oversees the tax collector and the assessor, so anything fiscally related is under one umbrella, where before everyone had turf and nobody crossed or came out of their lane. That was not good for the overall financial operation of the city. Most important, segregation of duties were established. There is ongoing monthly meetings with the Board of Ed. That had not been happening. The reconciliations were being done quarterly, maybe sometimes every 5 months, sometimes it was 6 months, and it was on a cash flow basis. And there was no accruals being done. There was no backup being exchanged. So the superintendent understands the finding. He understands what the exposure was as a result of not having timely reconciliations, not having year-end close, hard cutoff dates. not having accounts payable be accurate on the Board of Ed side. So he is committed and given his word that he is going to do his part on the Board of Ed side to help the city and make sure we're on board and timely reconciled. There was no double entry accounting between the city and the Board of Ed, and that is now being done. But most importantly, the roles and responsibilities have been defined. The auditor's on board, John Accavallo, and I think it's fair to say to him when many of the documents that were due to him in prior years were not timely provided, and I have figured out that most of that had to do with they weren't reconciled and they weren't available to hand to him. The next slide, this is that carve out that we had the auditor do, which was agreed upon procedures. And these were the three key steps that we need to do in order to take the corrective actions that were assigned, specifically those that help cause the problem, fix them. And then we actually assign them to individuals with due dates. And like anyone in life, if you have a due date and you have somebody who's overseeing you, people tend to get things done within that window. So this slide basically goes over the three action steps from the agreed procedures that were done in July of 19. Grand list growth, the next slide. While this is something we're all focused on, we did not put any assumptions in our 8-point plan. We did not put any assumptions on the street saying, we think we're going to have a 3 or 4% grand list growth. One thing that did happen was over a year ago, a new assessor was brought in. Part of that uptick in the ground list growth from 18 to 19 was a fresh set of eyes. There were some parcels that were undervalued. There were some businesses that their personal property, you would think they were operating a medical office out of the 70s from what they were claiming. So she was aggressive in her pursuit, and she actually works in Woodbridge part-time, I believe. She's been very good to the city in the sense of she's corrected some wrongs or some stagnation that we found in the assessor's office in assessing properties. So our grand list growth is a target. It's something we have to focus on. Now, I am not blaming the state when I say these next points, but it's a reality of what we're dealing with. The last point on that page. We have a 14-acre parcel of land, which is our last piece of developable land. And they're looking at some sort of mixed use, business on the ground floor, residential top. If you're ever in Derby and you go across the Derby-Shelton Bridge, it shows it's successful because they have like a 97% occupancy in two developments that were done there. They're about 6 stories, I believe. And they're mixed use housing with businesses on the ground floor. Our problem is we have Route 34, which is a state road that goes through Derby. There's a widening project that's been on the books for Derby for over 12 years. To widen Route 34, we can't develop the south side of that lane of our main street until that is done. No developer wants to buy it where they don't know how far the state's going to come into their parcel. That's our hope on the commercial side for grand list growth and development. We have over 70,000 cars zip through downtown Derby every morning, and people want to live here. Where we have a river, we have the subway. I'm from New York. Sorry, we have the train. So it's a great place to live, and you're not in Fairfield County. But our grand list growth, while we get incremental increases every year, the big development is across the street, and once that happens, we're going to see that shift from residential to commercial. But more importantly, we're going to get an injection of taxes that are going to be essential. The other thing on this page is there's a fuel cell development that's coming in. It's been approved. It's if ever you're down, you will be happy to show it to you. It's right across from one of the microbreweries we have, and that is going to be a tremendous injection of taxes to the grand list. I believe the number they're talking $200,000 a year. So we have some things in the pipeline. The last thing about fund balance replenishment, these are not just words. This is a commitment that 19 individuals on 2 boards plus the administration have made. We have a policy on fund balance. We're updating that policy. It was 7 to 10%. We're going to go 10 to 15% as a goal, understanding we're not going to be positive in fund balance till the end of fiscal year 20. We're going to be positive at the end of 20. We're going to be to the good over $1 million and change in 21. They're committed to the replenishment steps, and our goal is to, we've sunk over 3.4 million in 2 years into the fund balance replenishment, and you see that in the slides. So that's where we are. Let's see, I have the slides there for continued focus on success, 2 slides back. Pay-as-you-go capital, something the rating agencies focus on. We're committed to that. We have a strong capital plan. It's been It's been something that we've done for the last decade, and it's recognized in the rating agency summary. We are committed to funding long-term liabilities. In addition, when you saw that we had a medical hit in that 1 year, we have started an OPEB account, and there's about $500,000 in there, and they're committed to funding that as well. Growing the tax base is essential. We've been very conservative in the budgeting since. The budgeting has, we used to be done by the tax board chair. It was not owned by the finance department in prior years. That's not assigning blame. It's just what happened is the chair of the finance, of the tax board used to do the budget on an Excel, and that leaves room for error. We now currently use the GEM software budgeting module. So everything is entered there, and it goes through a vetting process where not one person is doing the entry. And each meeting, the board and the finance office go over any of the changes and any of the assumptions. So that we caught 2 errors this year from prior years, which 2 leases were not funded, small ones. But because of that check and balance, we were able to identify that before the budget was adopted. As with any town, Board of Ed in town, the relationship's sometimes strained because they're the major component of the budget. And once you give them a total dollar, you can't control it. But we've all come to the table, closed the door, hashed it out, and now we're working together. So the next couple of slides are just that development we were talking about. They're not in our assumptions, and the fuel cell is not in there, but it gives you a picture of the parcel from City Hall's roof that is total vacant land, and it's land ready to go, waterfront. And then to the left of the next picture, you'll see some warehouses. Those have since been taken down in the last 5 days. So there's a development going in there
Don't
now,
have
private
those.
development.
We don't have those pictures.
It's in the PowerPoint I sent.
Not the one I got. But that's not a concern. Was
Bill
there
just
anything
said
else
he got
you
it
wanted to
yesterday.
add?
Well, I'd like to touch on that. Bill said he sent it, everyone got it yesterday, I thought. So that to the left of that slide where you see the warehouses, that is the start of the private development. And they went to zoning last night, and they're ready to proceed with mixed use there. So it shows some development is coming.
70 units.
And it's, God, man.
And then they went to planning and zoning last night, and they're proposing 70 units, 1 bedroom, which is located right next to the railroad. So we're very excited that progress is coming into Derby, and with this whole plan and everything that we did once we figured out everything was going everything was going wrong down here, that we finally got it fixed up. So I just want to let you know that we are.
So I'd like to turn to John Accavallo first, if we can, on the audit and his assessment of corrective actions and whatnot. So, John?
Sure. Just to sum it up in just a quick few words, the major issue was getting away from not doing the basics, not reconciling timely, not having a centralized finance personnel that were capable of controlling all the information and monitoring it, making the right audit adjustments at the end of the year, closing out on a monthly basis. So since last year and the year before, what you had was you had people that would step in here or there, and now you have people in key positions where you didn't have them before that are capable of monitoring and doing those little things over and over again. The communication breakdown. I always said it was the commitment to financial reporting wasn't really there, and that was evident in all the findings that were there for years. To date, there's a plan in place to attack them. The reconciliations are being done. The communications between the departments is being done now where it wasn't done in the past. You have the right tone from the top, and the hierarchy is there. So the structure is there. When you have key turnover in personnel, a lot of this stuff stays the same over years. And in Derby, especially in the business manager position, that's what you really got. I mean, in the years that I've been there, I think I've worked with 8 different business managers, and you don't have that now. You have structure. You have the willingness to work with the city, with the superintendent and the mayor. So there's good communication going back and forth in communication between the business manager and the finance director. That wasn't there. It really had the tone from the business manager was basically, this is our budget. We're going to do what we want with it, instead of taking a fiscal responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility, closing out purchase orders at the end of the period, and actually, giving money back instead of pushing and pulling money into fiscal years as it seems fit, whether you're over or under budget. So the Board of Education moved to a new accounting package, which allows double entry accounting. Now, this is the biggest problem along all the boards of education in the state, is that they were operating with a single one-sided ledger system instead of having a balance sheet.
Excuse me, John?
I'm going to say something. I don't think that that's a problem across the state.
It's a problem based on my experience with all the municipalities that I've worked with. Over my 25-year career, it's been a problem.
Excuse me, this is John Schuyler. Just have a question on that. It's the past. Your report said that that some funds, obviously not all, were still doing single entry. And could you be more specific on which ones, or some samples?
Sure. I mean,
I don't understand how you can run something that way. Except for student activity fund.
That's one of them. That's correct. The grant special should have been a special revenue. It's operating as a single entry. The grant program, their Board of Education operational account, and there's other smaller funds that are single entry, police seizure, library. Those are just a few that come to my mind off the top of my head.
Can I ask, John, this is Kate Bush. John is, the expert CPA here. How did you offer an unqualified opinion when they had multiple funds that had single entry systems?
Well, what you have to do is you have to sit down with the client, and you have to go over what they need to do and have them take responsibility. I mean, the unqualified opinion is an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. It's not an opinion on the findings. The findings speak for themselves.
I guess
you're not going to qualify.
I'm trying to understand how you felt that the statements were fairly presented.
How many municipalities do you know that actually present the financial statements for audit?
Probably 160. The question is not what other municipalities are doing. Having
an opinion on the financial statements has nothing to do with assisting the client with preparing the financial statements, is what I'm saying.
I know that.
So,
what I'm saying is, I find it difficult to see how with single entry system, how you had the confidence in the financial statements to say that they were fairly presented.
Well, that's risk. That's the risk of it. And what you do is you adjust your risk procedures to take that into consideration. The real question is what are you doing to make sure that you're independent? It's not a qualification on the financial statements.
Let me ask
That's
another
not the
question
issue.
Who in the city was reviewing the audit findings in the past, and to whom were corrective action plans being presented, and why was there not follow-up on these?
We give our reports to the board. You sit down with the mayor and the finance director in the past, and now we have a new finance director and a new mayor. But every year when you sit down,
for purpose of transparency, when I was the treasurer, I did help the finance director draft what he should do to fix it. Absolutely.
And who
But
was responsible for following up? Is that why you no longer have your former finance director?
That is correct, ma'am. He was removed in November of 19.
Okay. So where do you stand with your accounting system?
Also, ma'am,
Corrective
Mayor Zekin again. When I took over 3 years ago, I say about a year and a half, I had John in my office, and being a new mayor and everything like that, explaining all the corrective measures that weren't getting done. That's when we stepped up, brought Keith in, and that's it. We have to get this done. Because, granted, I didn't understand a lot of it too, which is the problem with new elected officials and stuff like that. But we, as you can see of our presentation here, we rolled up our sleeves and we're getting stuff done here. So, but when John came in here and explained this to me, this is when we started moving forward.
So, according to the corrective action plan, you were going to have a double entry system by November of 2020. Are you still on track for that, or are you already set with that?
In my response to you, we're on track for most of the items. There's 2 that are remaining that we have to finish, and they're Board of Ed side. The Board of Ed grants, they took over the account with one of the recommendations. We gave them the account, and they have to do the double entries on their side. John, I believe he said he's going to be done probably a month or 2 late, but he's good doing that. And the student activity is the other one that's remaining. Police seizure now is on QuickBooks, and the library, they are operational within the general fund for the library accounts. They have an endowment that they were managing, but they have not touched it in this current fiscal year. So while that one's not done, ma'am, there's been no activity, but that's next on my hit list.
Okay. What about the other recommendations? The bank recs, are they happening now?
Yep. As I said earlier in my presentation, we meet with the Board of Ed monthly, and the other city bank rep.
Not
Yeah,
reconciling Board of Ed to.
I'm getting there. So for the city side, as I said earlier, we had additional staff assigned to the finance office who's helping with the reconciliations, and they are getting done timely. In fact, we're actually all the way through August, so we're good.
Good. That's good.
Painful, but good.
Keith, this is Tony from Woodbridge. I have a question for you.
Hey, Tony, how are you?
How you doing?
I don't know. I'll tell you at 11:01. I'll tell you at 11:01.
I was trying to get a handle from the paperwork that we have on your some of your long-term liabilities, and I was wondering if you can give us a flavor of more specifically your debt profile. I mean, we're in CMERS ourselves, so we know there's a large contribution payroll match on CMERS, which is upwards of 20% for police, and so that's a challenge going forward. And I'm also wondering your debt profile. Do you have any large capital projects that you have to do in the near future? I see you've got a sewer project of issued of unauthorized debt. Could you give us a sort of a flavor on if there's any challenges on your capital projects going forward?
Sure, I'll touch on it, Tony, and then if we bring, I may need Barry at the end from the FA work. But we do have, the city went in 2016 for a referendum for a major upgrade to our sewer infrastructure. Now, we have a WPCA, which is an authority, so they're autonomous to the city in theory, as Doug Gillette has educated me over the years. The debt is backed by the full faith and credit, or while they'll say the ratepayers, the city has some exposure. So we got referendum. We were shocked it passed, to be honest with you, and it passed like almost 3-1 for over $30 million for sewer improvements. Now, we have clay pipes. We have an infrastructure system under the downtown area that we think they're like original pipes. So we have major, when it's a rainstorm, we have major infiltration of rainwater, which leads to an increased volume at the plant, which increases operating costs. So we had to do this bond project to stop some of the infiltration that's coming in from rainwater, but more importantly, upgrade 4 pump stations. We are proceeding slowly on that, Tony. We did 3 of the pump stations. The largest one right there on Roosevelt Drive is almost done. So we've done some note issues incrementally as we need capital. We're going to be going for new money probably within the next year, another note sale, and we're about $8 million into the $32 million, $8 or $9 million. That is the only we did a school a few years ago. We do road bonds probably every 4 to 5 years. The last one was 2015. We'll see one coming up in 2021, and that's based upon a road maintenance program that Public Works keeps, where they do a site visit on roads, put an age and a life on them, and then of course roads get compromised for various reasons. So I see a road bond issue coming out in the next 18 months. We kind of have taken the position right now until we get our fund balance up. Even though we had a negative fund balance and we're still rated A+, you have to time when you go to the market. So we're good for now. We might do a note sale for another round of sewer money within the next 12 months, Tony. I think the road bonds will be in within 12 to 18. Other than that,
that's all you see pretty much going forward for now. That's good. Okay.
Yeah. We have a capital plan, Tony, inside the operating budget where we do your normal police vehicle replenishments. We don't issue.
I saw it in the OS. That's the similar one in the OS, I'm assuming, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So we do have a pay-as-you-go capital plan, and every department submits their capital request. And if it's technology-based or vehicle or a fixed asset with a life greater than 2 years, technology, if it's over 500, if it's a fixed asset over 1,000, it goes into the capital plan. That gets adopted by both the legislative body and the capital planning commission.
All right. That's helpful. Thank you.
And then regarding once we can't do everything at once, and I know that's not a good answer for the rest of it, but that OPEB and that post-employment benefit account is slow. At least it got created, and there's a commitment to start funding that. We just want to get the fund balance and our budgeting. Is
the retiree health closed to new hires, or do you still offer retiree health to all employees?
We do not offer retiree. Well, we have a couple of unions, Tony. On a macro level, we got out of the pension plan for the city and the non-police. Police are in MRF. So we eliminated the pension plan for all new hires. So we're trying to get that bell curve shifted to the left on our long-term liability for the pension. So now we just give a straight 2% contribution to a plan of their choice, and we're done. So there's no pension and there's no post-employment benefit, medical for City Hall employees. The police are in the MRF. So that's a MRF pension, and that contribution is driven off of their formula.
Right.
And they get medical through that. But we did eliminate post-employment medical and pensions for city employees, which includes Public Works, WPCA, City Hall, custodians, Board of Ed clerks, paraprofessionals, and library.
Well, that's helpful. Thanks, Keith.
Yep.
How are you doing with COVID expenses?
COVID expenses, although that's an operating budget this year, not much. The Board of Ed has the biggest hit for the city. We spent about $40,000 on COVID improvement. We were closed for a good 3 or 4 months. We did have some costs in getting people up and running remotely. We had no VPN in the city, so that was an expense. We bought laptops for the key department players. Citywide, we're about $40,000. Board of Ed, we're waiting for their final, but they're at about 170. And of course, we're going to submit all that for reimbursement. We did budget in the new year for COVID. I think we put in 50,000, and we had 43,000 at the tail end of last year. So we have enough in our operating budget to cover our side.
Okay, thank you.
This is Becky Seelman. Can I bring you back to talking about the pension plan for city employees? I noticed from your 2019 CAFR that at June 30, 19, that plan was 79% funded, and it strikes me as very likely that that number is going to go pretty significantly south at June 30, 20. Undoubtedly, your actuaries are talking with you about an updated mortality table. Your 7% interest rate assumption is pretty awfully high. You've under-contributed in this fiscal year to help replenish the fund balance, and undoubtedly your investments didn't do all that well.
Those are a lot of assumptions you're making, but okay.
Right. Well, I'm a pension actuary, so I know those tea
Okay.
leaves pretty well. So my question to you is, how strong is the city's commitment to getting back on track in terms of funding the pension plan? In my experience, it's a little bit of a slippery slope when people see a fairly well-funded pension plan and decide to short contributions to the pension plan in order to address other more immediate issues. So has the city contemplated or does the city have in place a firm policy to accelerate the contributions over the next 10 years to get back on track? Or is that, how firm is that commitment? Has it taken the form of a...
Solid as much
has
as
it
I'm
taken the
breathing.
has it taken the form of a formal policy, or is it just
Not a
and
policy.
everyone nods
Not a
their
pol-
head?
No, it wasn't everyone. Now they adopted the 8-point plan, and in the 8-point plan was a discussion and presentation on the pension. It's in one of the slides there where for long-term liability, where we said the good is we were solid. Yeah, we're solid. You're looking at 80. We were looking at 86% in the last one I have, but we knew we were going to take a hit, 2 to 3% for each one of the years that we skipped. We knew we were going to wind up in the low 80s, high 70s, and with that we said you have to fund without any other things changing, market performance, any other changing variables on the payout. It's going to go about 60,000 a year for the next 10, and they accepted that. They agreed, and they're committed to that. So it's as solid as.
So does that
it was
policy
part of.
mean? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, ma'am.
Does that policy mean that you're going to up the contribution by 60,000 a year, or does that mean that on top of what your actuary tells you is the actuarially determined contribution, you're going to contribute an additional $60,000? And I ask that because as I look in your CAFR at the 4-year history that's presented there, for 3 years in a row, the city contributed exactly the same dollar amount to the
Correct.
pension plan, and then subsequent to that, of course, you drop down. But that indicates to me that you're not budgeting and contributing the actuarially determined contribution that your actuary gives you, but rather that you are, looking at what you contributed the prior year. So
no, as I stated earlier, that 3 years when they kept the budget flat, I had made the statement that it was clear that budgeting was not being done to recognize the expenses and the increase in expenses during that 3-year period when they kept the mill rate flat. So that observation is correct on your part. What we're saying since then, budgeting has gone up, mill rate has gone up because we're recognizing liabilities. Now with the pension, what's going to happen is, and Rich could address this, he's going to come out with a new pension report, and he's going to take into account the prior year contributions as well as market performance and how we hit our assumptions, and he's going to come up with a number. What was shared with the board when they adopted the plan was we anticipate it's going to be that 60,000 for each of the hits we took for the 2 years. But there may be other variables, ma'am, that drive that we recommend the contribution higher, right? So if we don't hit 7, it may, that's, you know how it works. That may have an uptick. We may beat 7, and that may have a downtick. So the commitment is, board, for you to give up these 2 years and reduce the funding to the pension, it's going to be at least $60,000 a year for the next 10 years. Now, it could be more. So I'll let Rich address that. But the board is absolutely committed to funding the liability, the exposure. Absolutely, as much as I'm sitting here. But at the time, we didn't know it. We knew that the return would be at least $60,000 a year for the next 10 years. That's what we knew at the date of the plan. That's what we shared. That's what they adopted.
This is Kate Bush. Is that a?
Can I let Rich? Can I let Rich finish that? I'm sorry.
No. My question is important first. You say there's a commitment to fund it. Is there actual force of law behind that, or are you relying on the commitment of the elected officials? Did you pass any kind of ordinance requiring this?
No, there's no ordinance requiring it.
Okay, then let me follow up with, what's your sense, say the current administration goes out in 2 years or in 4 years, what's your sense on the commitment of the community to continue to follow through with what you've done?
My pause is, as well as I'm sitting here and the players that I'm seeing on the boards, they're committed to it. I mean, we laid it out to them. They understand it. They're committed to it. What better way of showing commitment than in a town going up 4.5 mils in 2 years, and they're elected by the people, right? So if there's a symbol of commitment when you're elected to a board like a fiscal board, and you go up 4.5 mils in a down economy, that speaks volumes to the commitment. Now, the personal discussions and the discussions at the meeting, they've said they're committed to it. I
understand they are. I was curious if you felt the community, and I guess what you're trying to say to me is that through them paying their taxes, they're committed.
I'm saying to you that for the tax board to vote on a budget that went up 4.5 mils in 2 years and collecting 98 to 99%, I would say those two together. Was that Kate? I'm sorry, I don't know who that was.
Yes, yeah.
All right, Kate, I'm saying between those two, that says a big chunk of it.
Okay.
Ancillary to those two, the people that are on the board, the 10 tax board members, have been nothing but hard on this plan. Like, they're making sure we're getting the value for the assets. They're making sure we're reconciling. So there is a newfound commitment, I would say, that's pretty solid right now.
This is Becky
This
again.
is Mike. I've just got one quick related follow-up question. So it looks like your contributions were $200,000 in 18-19 and 19-20. What is the budgeted contribution for 2021?
It's going to be I think it's 540. Which is still low, but it's the uptick to what it should have been in 17, 18, or 18, 19. I'm sorry.
Okay. And do you have any sense on what percentage of the ADEC that is at this point?
I'll turn to Rich. I don't want to put him on the spot. Rich, what you want to ask that? I don't want to guess.
I don't have that number in front of me, but that would be the most recent valuation. They do, City of Derby does valuations once every 2 years. So that information is available. I just don't have it handy.
All right. So, and it's good to see that you're making progress getting back up to the 540 from the 200, but can we get a sense of your commitment for, I guess at this point it'll be for the 2021-2022 budget, but do you anticipate that you might be able to get to 100% contribution of the ADEC for that budget year?
As I look in the CAFR, the ADEC over the past 4 fiscal years has been anywhere from $812,000 to $1 million. And given the sort of bad factors at work in this past fiscal year, I expect that number is going higher.
Well, let's wait. I would say we were committing to get to 750, but 750, 800, sir, that's not a problem. So yes, the commitment was to go to, we had 750, but let's just say it's 800. That's not an issue. The board is committed to we said 750, but it's not gonna be hard to put another 50 grand in there.
Kate, excuse me, it's Kim. I just want to give you a time check. It's 10:59 and we do have another town coming on at 11.
Yes, I appreciate that. Do the commissioners have any other questions at this point?
Can I ask, who was the gentleman who just
not
asked
a-
that last question?
That was
not
Mike
another-
LeBlanc.
I'm sorry, who?
Mike LeBlanc.
Hi, Mike. So the answer to that was, we were looking at 740. I think it was 740, 750. But again, I'm not, another 50 grand is not going to be a problem if that's the commitment we have to make, and the board's okay with that. I'm not afraid of that number.
Yeah. And look, I'm sure we're going to be speaking again in the months ahead, and one of the things I would just ask is that you keep us apprised as far as where this is headed with the budget development for the next cycle.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
By the way, this is John Schuyler. I didn't want to ask a question, but I just did want to congratulate you, despite our pushing for the best possible pension funding. Looking around, I say the city has done a credible job of refusing to let it get rated years ago, and I think you should be commended for that.
Well, thank you, sir.
So I think
one thing I do want to share with you is we're excited about this recovery. I mean, that may sound weird to people. You got to find your joys in life, but this was a challenge, and it was a challenge that required uniting the boards and commissions, presenting the problem, opening up honestly about what the problem was. It was led by a human error, contributed by the corrective action items, and that's all transparent now. And the fact that everyone's rowing together is something we're proud of. And we're not asking for state money. We don't want state money. This is our problem. We own it. We're going to recover, and we're going to get out of it. I believe you'll see for June 30th to 20 and June 30th to 21, we were within 100,000 of our bogey, what we predicted for the end of 19 as the fund balance. I think we're being conservative. We're going to be a little ahead of what we predicted for the end of 20, and then 21, we're going to be into the million plus in the fund balance. And that's, rating agencies heard this. They accepted it. They bought into it. They commended us, and they went down just to an A+. So I don't think there's too many towns out there with a negative fund balance that are A+. So I think people see we're not playing games anymore. This is a serious corrective action and an 8-point plan. I know, Barry, do you want to share anything?
We're kind of running out of
summed it up
time here, so if you don't mind, I'd like to wrap this up. This is Kate Bush again. Going forward, I think one thing we do need to see, you had the corrective action plan. I'd like to get an update before our next meeting is the 30th, so not bad. Before would be our December meeting, if we could get an update on where you stand with your corrective action plan and what the financial results have been, or you should be pretty wrapped up with your fiscal 20 numbers. They look really good right now, so it'd be nice to see where that comes out and, how things are going with the fiscal 21 budget. Is there any other information that other commissioners would like to get for our next regular meeting?
Kate, we could take a poll and they can get back to myself or Bill, and we can get that out to the town.
That would be great. I really appreciate your coming or calling.
Kate, I think I was invited, but then I offered to come. So however I got here, we're here. So we're excited. I'm still confused on how I got invited to the party, but that's okay. We're good. I brought gifts when we came.
Yeah. Okay. So if commissioners can, touch base with Bill on any information that you would like to get for our next meeting, that would be terrific, and he'll get that out to the city for their response.
Kate,
Okay.
Thank you, and to the commissioners, thank you very much. We look forward to updating you in December.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, do we have Hamden here?
Hi, this is Curtis Eatman, Finance Director for the town of Hamden. I'm on the line.
Hi, Curtis. Thank you for joining.
Yes.
Kim Gibson.
And you have a second Kurt, this is Mayor Kurt Lang. Two Curtises for the price of one.
And good morning, Curtis. Mayor.
Good morning.
I'm also joined. I'm also joined with the deputy, the chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, as well as the state legislative director. We're here.
Okay.
Would you like us to hop right into the agenda, or you tell us how you'd like us to proceed?
So this is Kate Bush. I'm the chairman. You have the full MFAC with you today. Lucky you.
Okay.
I would like if you could jump right in, but let me just tell you one thing. I'd like to wrap this up by noon. So if you would go through your presentation, but please try and allow time for the commissioners to ask questions.
Okay. I think we can do that.
Curtis, just so you know that. Curtis, this is Dave Capelli from Clement Associates. Just so you know that I'm here as well.
Oh, I'm glad that you are. So just real quick to run through from the mayor's office staff, myself, it's Kurt Lang, my deputy chief of staff, Patrick Donnelly, Walter Morton, director of legislative affairs, and then from our finance team, we have our finance director who introduced himself, Rick Galarza, deputy finance director. We have our outside financial advisor, Barry Bernabe, and David Panico, our bond counsel, and then Dave Capoletti from our auditors. And
hey,
so,
Panico, long time no see.
Yes, welcome. Thank you for taking our call.
It's so much harder to do these things over the phone than in person, but we'll do our best. I'm going to run in between the presentation documents and then just some history, and then we'll open up for any questions that you have, and then certainly offer any supplemental that we can afterward if there's anything you want us to do deeper dives on. So how did we get here is really what it comes down to. And when I look at it as a decade-long picture, really, from 2010 to now, where we've had improving intention to make some really strong steps to improve things that were chronically wrong with the town and affected us different ways from year to year. And these included everything from major pension reform and medical insurance reform, downsizing of staff, major effort to right-size our budget, implementing self-implemented debt diet, and a lot of different actions that I think people would appreciate. And yet here we are with a year where we're going to end in a deficit because of a lot of challenges that occurred. And that is frustrating because I think as we talk, you'll see that different steps were taken and implemented that were the right ones. And we'd prefer to be at a better spot on this date. But I do think that because of the steps that were taken to build that foundation, we'll be able to rebound really quickly. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone today and to present some of the challenges that we face and also some of the opportunities that we have and some of the solutions that have been worked on already, some of the ideas that we're working on moving forward. And what I'm hoping is that in 12 months from the point of the audit that we finished this year, that we'll have our strongest fund balance position that we've had in probably a decade or two. I also am appreciative of this group. I only learned of this group relatively recently, and specifically the membership. And I was really, really pleased to know that this is such an experienced group of financial folks that are battle tested and know municipal government, municipal finance. So you can not only listen to our ideas, but that you can certainly advise us. This is a good one. This is not a good one, and some ideas that we can take from you. And there's no pride in ownership, so all ideas are certainly appreciated. So just giving a little history, going back to 2010, the town found itself in a real crisis because we had a low fund balance position, and our medical self-insurance fund was at negative $9 million. And it was not funded well in the town budget either. We're a town that's medically self-insured. So that had to be addressed. And when we went through what we did to address it, starting in that first budget that Mayor Jackson worked on, and I was CAO at the time. We went through a really painful budget process. We did 10% reduction in the town staffing. We did privatization efforts on a couple of different fronts, including privatization of our ice rink. We did concession packages. We did a refinancing program. We did medical funding improvements moving forward so that we didn't fall into that deep of a position again that you'll see in the budgets. And going back over that 10 years, I think that our medical funding has increased about $20 million a year plus, in addition to some reform that have addressed some cost issues. So in addition, over the decade, especially over the last 5 years, we've worked really hard to successfully negotiate each and every one of our town and Board of Ed contracts with new medical insurance plans, high deductible HSAs. And those HSAs, for every single contract, we've got the final of the grandfathered police officers, the golden 40 that we had just this July 1st. And with all of them on, the experience actually started to show savings in real dollars last year in the form of about $3 million in savings. And you never see that in medical self. You see just large increases, and you hope for just smaller increases year to year. Never mind a reasonable increase number and then savings during the year. So we're really pleased with that. And now we're entering into our next round of contract negotiations, and we'll work to continue enhancing that medical insurance reform. And what it really comes down to is that I look at a philosophy of when it comes to the town finances and the budgets, that we could spend a lot of time looking at smaller issues that are kind of working around the margin, where people are going to bicker over one line item or one expense, or you can really jump in and dive into the bigger impact items that'll make more structural change to the budget. Because when you look at our Board of Education funding, medical, pension, debt service, other insurances, that's really 2/3 of the budget plus. And that's where small adjustments can make a real big impact. So to that end, we implemented a program over the last 5 years that works to reduce a lot of our expenses. So I talked about medical quickly. Our capital improvement and our bonding for the first half of the decade versus the second half of the decade, I mentioned that we did a self-imposed debt diet, and that resulted in a 38% reduction in our capital borrowing from 6 years previous to the last 5.5 years, which is about $85 million compared to $52 million in the last 5 years. And of the $52 million, the majority of that money is put into projects that are going to bring us dollars, that are bringing us either school improvement money that's reimbursed from the state, and we have a 60% plus reimbursement rate from the state for school construction projects. And we've also done a large bridge improvement project that was an 80/20. And we've continued that over the last couple of years, only really borrowing very, very small capital amounts as needed. So medical and debt both have had reductions in cost savings, one through negotiation, one through choice and a little bit of pain. And that brings us to pension. And if you've checked into Hamden at all, you know that Hamden has had pension challenges. And in the early 2000s, we dealt with that medical self-insurance problem first. And then after we got through that, it was time to tackle pension. And pension reform has been really something that we've been working on for the entire decade. And it's starting from the beginning of time, as far as our history books and finances will show. It's embarrassing to say, but it's the truth. I don't think that Hamden has ever funded the pension at the ARC payment that we should contribute, or we would never be having this issue. I don't think we have one single year we've contributed ARC. And in the 2000s, particularly in the earlier 2000s, there were years where the town was contributing zero or close to zero compared to ARC. There was a year of $250,000 when the ARC was $5, $6, $7 million. That put us in a real hole, and that needed to be addressed. So comprehensive pension reform is something that began in the early part of the decade, and we brought in some pros from Siegel in Atlanta that had helped to solve Atlanta's pension problem and pension crises. And the first thing was to halt overpayments that were happening. And ironically, how this happened was former mayor was literally reading our plan document, and our plan document was talking about COLA. And as the SEAL group was studying our pension, they were telling us that the real driver is the COLA costs, and that 1% of increased COLA was the equivalent of an additional $2 million of necessary ARC contribution. So if you're doing 3%, you're doing an extra $6.3 million a year of ARC payments just from the COLA alone. And that was really unsustainable. So in reading the plan document, the previous mayor looked at it and said, it doesn't say 3%, it says up to 3%. And discussed that with Labor Council, discussed that with personnel, and no one could say that that was wrong. At some point, at some time, 3% started and weren't stopped, and that was wrong, and that was halted in 2012, I believe. So the up to 3% is based on CPI, and that was step one. Step two was to do pension obligation bonds, and the POBs that we did were not for was not to fund the entire pension, which is, in my opinion, a risky proposition. But it was to build corpus and allow the fund to actually start growing some dollars in the market. And we had the money in the market in a growth position, but in a conservative growth position, knowing what we need to, that we had payments that we needed to make, but we didn't want to go to pay as you go, because the pay as you go scenario was incredibly expensive. It would have brought our annual payments to some $60 million a year in the document that CEO prepared for us. So we did a POB for 125 million. It was 123 change, which is about a third of our pension obligation, and we have been paying that since. And then we've done a ramp-up process to get ourselves up to full funding. And in the fiscal 21 budget is the first time that our ARC is fully funded at 100%. In addition to the POBs, we negotiated all of our union contracts except for our guardians, which we're going to be going to arbitration on. But every town and board of education contract now has a COLA of up to 1.75. So, again, still based on CPI, up to 1.75 instead of the up to 3. And then just recently, and this was asked way back when this first started, we talked about, well, what about the overpayments that were made? Can we correct it? Can we recoup some of the funds because it was done for such a long period of time? And at the time we were told no, but in talks about a year plus ago with Siegel in Atlanta again, I was talking a little bit with them about some of the pension reform measures that were being taken in larger cities and in states across the country, and just kind of expressing frustration that people would be able to do things that were helpful for their fund that seemed to make common sense, but that we were stuck and not even be able to correct our overpayment process. And they just looked at me kind of funny and said, well, why not? Why can't you fix it? And I told them that we had several lawyers that told us we couldn't, and that there wasn't a mechanism for it. And they said, well, let me look into that. And they did, and they did a study for us. They broke down what was buckets of extra pension money over the CPI's capped 3% that were put into these pretend buckets for each of the employees, each of the individuals, and then did a study to show where each of the buckets actually ran out of extra money to put into that 3%. Long story short, we had a report that allowed us, as a retirement board that serves as the pension trust, the pension trust group, an opportunity to correct the overpayments, correct the percentages. And so they were recalculated, and the retirees had the adjustments made, and that was just voted on this summer. And that will have an impact of over $15 million in reduced liabilities for the plan, and a reduction in ARC payments of about $680,000 a year. Pause there for a second, and go back over and take a look at our document that we submitted. And it's just a little history over the decade. I'm trying to be careful with time. The fiscal 20 budget, in addition to our decade of issues and solutions, is going to end in a deficit. And the deficit range is going to be from 4 to 6 million. And as a closeout project is being worked on, We'll see where that lands. I think it's going to land on the lower side of it. I hope it will even land a touch better, but we'll see how that goes as the audit process and the closeout process continues. It's going to be partially driven by how much the board can assist us with their closeout process and with some reimbursement of grant funds that previously hadn't been made by the board, but had been expenses that the town incurred. Town of Hammond covers all of our board's medical insurance, all of the capital projects. That's pretty natural. But all the medical insurance, we cover their entire SEMERS pension payment. We cover other ancillary insurances, property, auto liability, et cetera. So we cover a lot of the fringe and insurance costs on the town side, and some reimbursement of those funds will go a long way, especially in years that are tough. So because we have a low fund balance position, that deficit that's going to likely occur in this FY20 budget is going to put us for the first time into a negative fund balance position. And that negative fund balance position will be between 2 and 4 million is the estimated range, because we have 1.9 right now. And then you'll see the closeout projection right now as estimated. If you have any questions on that, the finance director and deputy finance director can walk you through it.
Does anybody have any questions on that? When do you anticipate finalizing those numbers?
Curtis, Rick, could you give your thoughts on that?
Yes, this is Curtis. In about another month or so, we'll be able to finalize those numbers.
Okay.
And we had a problem over a couple of years getting our audit finalized in time before the end of the year date, and had to do extensions. And really for smaller reasons, things that weren't finished that were somewhat out of our control. And very pleased to say that we got our audit on time last year, and intend to continue that process. So moving forward a little bit, what can we do to address the immediacy of that deficit situation? And the answer in short term is to eliminate it almost immediately. That's our goal. And we'll be planning on doing that through three actions. One, the fiscal 21 budget is a far more sustainable budget, and we approved a quite large tax increase to bring in additional revenue. We have more conservatively budgeted revenues on our non-tax numbers, and we can dig into that in more specifics as we move forward. We're planning on having a sale of a major town asset that is not planned to be a one-time revenue that's going to just offset taxes or help to plug a hole in the budget, but we're going to use those funds and the proposal that's on the table right now is a $9 million offer for a school that is planned to close, and we would use those funds to bolster our fund balance position and to pay for school construction projects directly with this money instead of additional borrowing or to pay down debt. So it'll all be used for sound purposes, so that once it's going, you're not having that expectation again the following year. And then we also have a refinance restructure that was recently accomplished forget the date, about 2 months ago. Gentlemen, does that sound about right?
Yes.
Okay. And in that restructure refunding, we found significant savings in the fiscal 21 and fiscal 22 years. But while doing that, while typically you would do that and then have that be the offset, instead of having that major tax increase, we had the major tax increase. We fully funded debt service at the full amount that was due, and then did the restructure. So we have that full savings amount available in the budget to bolster the fund balance position. So after the 12 months, if we can have a successful budget year for fiscal 21, we'll have gone from a $1.9 million fund balance position as of today to a negative fund balance position in the audit to a fund balance position of higher than 1.9 just 12 months later in the following audit.
Kate Bush here. Can I just ask a question on that chart you showed on the debt restructuring? You've got the left-hand column saying the outstanding debt service, and then you've got the 2020 refunding restructuring. So are you saying that, if I understand what you just said, you budgeted the 22 million?
Yes.
And are you only needing 16 million, so you saved 6?
For that first
I'm
year,
just trying to understand that.
Yep. You're exactly right, except that first line, the 21, there's $8 million in savings, and in fiscal 22, there's 6.6.
So then what are the negative numbers?
Barry, can you walk through this quick?
Yeah, sure. The negative numbers are savings, and the positive numbers are savings. So if you look at that total there, Kate, it totals like 4.6. That's a cost in nominal dollars to the town over the 12 years there. On a present value basis, it was about $400,000 cost to the town.
Okay, so Barry, help me understand in 2032 what's happening. What would the debt service be in 2032?
If you look at the second column there, outstanding debt service, Kate, you'll see that in 31, the debt was 26.7 million, and then it was going to drop down to 17.1 million. Now that drop off is going to be pushed off a year because we pushed debt out until 32.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, and in this process, we did make sure that we didn't have any balloon payments that would be shocking, and no Hartford scenarios. I think we watched that very carefully, and so while there is that large payment in 2032, it kept it along the same lines of our debt service payments that are very consistent over the years, so that we know what our expenses are going to be, and then have a nice fall off instead of a jump off. If we can do the 2 consecutive years, and those savings have already been realized through a bond restructure sale that's been completed, if we can do both of those years successfully, so again, funding the debt service and already having the savings in the pocket, our fund balance position should be at 5% plus of budget after 24 months. And we haven't had that position in town for a very long time. Again, present value cost for this restructure program was $485,000. And the 21 budget, of course, is already approved with this plan in mind. The mill rate increase that I mentioned earlier, just for specifics, a 3.1 mil increase, and that created about $10 million in additional tax revenue. We also had a lower tax collection rate estimate in this budget based on the world that we live in now, not knowing exactly what's going to happen with the ability to pay. Although the fiscal 20 numbers for tax purposes were better than we expected for that fourth quarter, it was still budgeted at a 98% when typically we have it at 99, just a little north or just a little shy of 99 for budgeting purposes. Next section is some of the challenges and opportunities that we have with our town unions. So in the fiscal 20 budget, we saw that we were having a problem from some revenue losses that were our fault from bad estimations, and also from some areas that weren't coming in because of the changing world and because of things outside of our direct control. But trying to get a balance to that budget at that point in the year was very, very difficult to try to achieve, despite trying to do spending freezes, hiring freezes, things of that nature, because you could not do a layoff. Almost all of our unions had concession packages that were in existence that created previous savings that helped, but that also was a hindrance this year because we couldn't take any major immediate action to avoid this deficit that that has us talking today. But in the long run, I think that we're actually in a better position for it because it allowed us to not have to make any draconian moves that would really hurt the town services and hurt the town long term in order to avoid this deficit and instead address it in a different way that'll be more sustainable across the longer range. There's also some opportunities with our town unions. I think that they are very cognizant of the fact that a reduction in their ranks is something that they obviously don't want to see. And earlier I mentioned that we had a 10% reduction in our town staffing in the earlier part of the decade because of that medical insurance problem. We also had a 5%, an additional 5% staffing reduction in this fiscal 21 budget. And so we have departments, not to go and cry in our Cheerios, but we have some departments that are very low, that are very lightly staffed, let's put it. As an example, our tax office years ago had 8.5 people in it, and now we have 5. At one point it was 4.5. Our assessor's office had 7.5 people. Now we have 4 budgeted, 3 actually working. And you go across the town departments, and that's the case almost everywhere. And that's workable to a point, but there's a point of diminishing returns with that as well. So I'm going to pause for a second on because the Board of Ed obviously is our largest department, and Walter Morton, who's on the call, is our legislative aide. He also serves on the Hampton Board of Education, and they went through a really great budget process and education improvement process over the last 18 months. I'd like to ask him to speak to that a little bit and the group that was brought in to show how that's going to help with our largest line item in our budget. Unless we've lost him.
Maybe he's muted.
Walter? Well, I can start and then I'll have him jump in if they can. I guess they're a little tech. They brought in a group from Boston, and they went through a process to right-size their schools from the number of schools that they have, to do significant work with what we have as a pretty significant racial imbalance problem in town, and a mixed, odd racial imbalance problem because we really are a melting pot, and we are a very we're one of the towns. In fact, the federal government picked us in the COVID FEMA process because our town best mirrored the state in demographics. So when you look across our school district, they wanted to, number one, fix the schools when it comes to racial diversity. They wanted to fix the schools when it comes to how many schools we need and what they wanted to provide as an educational program. And they also were fully aware that battling for dollars every year is not somewhere that they wanted to be and not somewhere that the town wanted to be. We actually get along very well with the board, cooperative relationship, both personally and financially. And they want to get to a point where they had very small, sustainable increases that would allow them to provide their program without any, unexpected jumps in annual cost. So throughout this process, a couple of the outcomes were a plan to change our schools formatting and go from an elementary K-6, pre-K to 6, to a universal pre-K program. And that's something that we're really excited about. But to accomplish that, we needed to reduce the size of our elementary schools to only go up to 5th grade, and then move our middle school to be 6 to 8. In that same process, they realized that they could close 2 of our elementary schools, Shepherd Glen and Church Street. I mentioned the names of the schools specifically because Shepherd Glen was already approved for a $25 million like new renovation. School has not been improved for, I believe it's been 50 years now, and had a host of repair needs. And then they closed 2, and then they brought on a magnet school that was being run through ACES, and they brought that back on as a traditional elementary school. So the net closure of 1 full school for reduced savings in operations annually, and then the reduction of one full like new renovation on the capital side of things. And in those changes, it wasn't planned this way, but through those changes and the publicity that surrounded it, we had people reach out to us from the private sector and from the quasi-governmental sector, if you will, and say, hey, we're interested in these buildings, particularly Church Street. And we have a proposal that has been submitted to us. We have a formal offer letter from Booker T. Washington Academy for the purchase of Church Street School. It's for $9 million. In addition, just to show their seriousness, not only has their board voted on it, they've given the offer letter, but they've also rented already. They've done a lease with a school building, a smaller school building that's only 2-3 blocks away from Church Street, that's owned by the Archdiocese. And they did a 5-year lease with 4 5-year extensions to house their middle school and high school. And then their goal would be to have their pre-K to 6 be at Church Street and have almost a campus style effect within a few blocks of each other. And I mentioned earlier what we would plan to use those funds for. Okay, so in the fiscal 21 budget, when you look through our operating expenses and revenues, you'll see that we learned from our mistakes of fiscal 20 in nearly every department. And when you go down, almost every single department has reduced revenue estimates, and they were much more closely aligned with, and the budget process was run through looking at a 3-year back picture and then also thinking about 3 years forward. But with the revenues, especially looking at 3 years back for actuals, so that we didn't have problems where you'd have very large unexpected non-received revenues. And we're hoping that that'll keep this budget strong as we work through it, even though we're only in the initial months. We know that we're going to have to work really hard to continue to generate both additional taxes in the coming couple of years and work to generate additional non-tax revenue and try and diversify our revenue streams. Although having a very large property tax revenue source, while usually that's something that I complain about because we have a high mill rate, and it's difficult for our residents. It's difficult for Connecticut having the property mill rate as the regressive tax system. But this year, because of COVID and because of looking at other locations that rely on a variety of different taxes, income taxes, and not just property taxes, the property taxes are actually the most stable. So it puts us in a good position to have that stability in very unstable times, and with some more conservative estimating even for those collections. I mentioned that the pension expenses are continuing to be addressed and work to be lowered for the annual costs, but that we're up to our 100% funding. We've established a fiscal stability committee, and I mentioned that because I hesitated to at first because committees, they're nice, and you mention a committee and it's nice that you have it, but what is it really going to do? And maybe it'll produce some ideas, but a lot of times these things get put on a shelf, et cetera, and I'm not trying to fool you into that. But I did want you to know about this because it's a little bit unique in that it was actually approved as a formal resolution of our council, and it brings together 3 members of our legislative council, 3 citizen members, each with financial expertise, and 3 members of the town's administration as the 9-member panel. And it also has myself, the positions of mayor, positions of council president, position of board of ed chairman, and position of superintendent, all as and the position of finance director, certainly, as ex officio members of this group. And the group is tasked with working both on short-term issues in addressing and making sure that our fiscal 21 budget stays stable, and also tasked with working on longer-term improvement issues and sustainability issues for the town. And we're really optimistic about it, and we haven't tried this style of formalized group in the past. You'll see in the presentation there's a fiscal 21 expense breakdown, and the Board of Education percentage of expense may be something that jumps out as being low. I just wanted to highlight that the additional BOE expenses in the $50 million insurance line, in the pension line, and also in the fringes line, which I'm just trying to look and see, that's in the insurance line. So the Board of Ed expenses do actually result in about 60+ percent of our budget total. So we talked a little bit about BOE cost containment and their efforts. If Walter's back on, I could have him talk a little bit about that program. But I went through, I think, most of the overall items. Rick, can you talk a little bit about our workers' compensation fund, please? And medical self-insurance internal funds?
Sure, Mayor. Our pleasure. We're projecting for fiscal year 1920 to come in balance on our internal service funds. It's pay as you go. We have a little bit of a surplus in our medical line, about $300,000. But that takes into account all of our active employee contributions, all our our retiree active contributions netted out versus their expenses for the active and the pensioners. And what we look in the audit, and we also have Dave Capoletti, who's the auditor, external auditor for the town from Claremont. But you know, as we did the analysis on our medical for this year and last year, what's really driving is that we don't really have sufficient funds in our reserves, and the IBNR, they're incurred but not reported, is really driving up the liability on the internal service fund. So we're working this year. We just asked for our closeout report from PMA, who's our third-party administrator for workers' comp, to take a look at our liabilities to see if hopefully some of those liabilities can come down. What the town hasn't had in a couple of years, it was a risk manager. We currently have a risk manager on board who's handling a lot of the safety issues for a lot of the departments like police, fire, and public works to try to avoid any major accidents that's really driving up the cost. And we're also on the other side, on the financial side, we're working currently with our attorneys from PMA to try to settle a couple of these major accounts that hopefully will give us the ability to reduce our liabilities on the internal service funds. So we're self-insured and we sort of pay as you go. We're trending fine in fiscal year 1920, and we're trending a little bit less than our actuals for fiscal year 2021, changing gears a little bit. For the current fiscal year, we're trending a little bit less. We're keeping an eye on it, but we're projecting hopefully some savings in that account. We're just not really sure as of yet due to offices and doctors' offices just reopening due to COVID. So we're going to monitor that. We're meeting monthly with our external clients with Brown and Brown, who take a look at our consultants for the medical, and we're meeting with them monthly just to trend, just to get some data points and just to trend our experience from month to month, from current fiscal year and also from prior fiscal years to see if there's any trends that are going to stick out. But right now, we haven't really had any major significant claims that we had to cover. And our workers' comp, we haven't had really any new employees or any claims put in the first quarter into our workers' comp system. So we're trending pretty much online. We were favorable in the medical for fiscal year 1920. We sort of broke even in our workers' comp. What we need to do is just focus on our long-term liabilities to reduce those numbers out of our internal service funds.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick. And then moving forward, we're looking at, along with Brown and Brown, some efforts that could further reduce medical expenses. We have some 40 plus grandfathered plans from amongst retirees that builds up admin costs, and we're trying to figure out a way to have some incentivized changeover, because the newer plans that we have are far more cost efficient for the town and provide the exact same benefits. In fact, several of the retirees would enjoy better benefits and more items that are covered under insurance, but the town would experience a lot of cost savings from that changeover. And we're exploring the idea of a medical buyout as well. And we kicked that idea around with Siegel, and that's one of the ideas that I think the Fiscal Stability Committee will be digging into and looking for a report in. So one of the challenges that could cause a problem in the fiscal 21 budget is COVID revenue loss, and I think that's something that a lot of municipalities are facing, and it could be all of them, it could be some of them, but inner ring suburbs I think are going to have a little bit more challenge than others, because we have folks that have been having some challenges with their tax payments and with their working situations as it is. So certainly COVID situation is not going to help that. And I'm very pleased that the fiscal 21 budget has the lower revenue lines, because we shouldn't be optimistic on those revenue lines in a year that has such worldly change. We do have a $6 million line in the revenues for COVID-related revenue, and that could be replacement of lost revenue if the federal government can move through any aspect of the HEROES Act. Under the initial HEROES Act passed by the House, Hamden would have received $26.2 million, I believe it was, under that formula. Now, obviously, that's not going to pass as was first approved by the House, but some version of that will end up coming out with some relief for municipalities and for states, as well as reimbursement for added expenses, both on the board side and the town side, that we're hoping will make up the bulk of that $6 million. In addition, the lower tax rate, percentage rate of collection that was put in this budget is the equivalent of roughly $1.7 million. So if we have a consistent tax rate that we've had in previous years, that is covering a third of this expense, at least how I look at the overall revenue picture. And there's a number of items when you look at the different departments' revenues that, if we even have a year like last year, or even a little bit better, our revenue picture will have enough even internally to cover at least half of this COVID line. But that is one item that we have to keep a very close eye on, because we don't want to have a situation where we've done this restructuring and have to put a bulk of it toward making sure that we balance this year's budget. That's not what we want to do. Because I could tell you, come hell or high water, we're gonna get that fund balance back into a positive position in 12 months.
This is Kate Bush.
Yes.
I have to say, I think you're a heck of a lot more optimistic than I am about the HEROES Act. So I'm glad to hear that you have some contingency plans for making up that $6 million in revenue.
Without question.
Yeah, I think your Fiscal Stability Committee is a terrific idea. Let me ask you this: what is your sense of the community's commitment to getting the finances of the city back on track? Say you were to lose the next election, do you think that there's commitment within your residents to keep moving forward?
I really do, and I'm not just saying that because I'm thinking that's the answer that you want to hear. I think it's true, because we've had more involvement from citizen groups, and there's certainly been more of an effort from civic associations and the like to learn the budget process, and we've had more participation in the process. And I think that there's more of a buy-in of getting the finances fixed. And I think that the committee being formed by resolution means that regardless of the people that are here in office, the committee will still sustain and continue working. And the only caveat I'll give, and this is just a personal opinion, the backbreaker for that, in my opinion, is if too many services are eliminated, because at a point, people are going to say that I'm not getting a value for what I'm paying for here. And that's, I think, Hamden's biggest challenge when you look at it on a macro basis. If all of a sudden if we had a closed schools in addition to the ones that are planned for closure, and you had larger class sizes, if our outstanding fire response time that's upgraded our fire insurance ratings were to reduce, and people would suddenly say, why am I choosing to live here, and why am I going to invest here with my family? And that's a problem.
All right, let me see if any of the other commissioners have questions that they would like to ask. Bueller? Anybody?
It's Kim Kennison. Mayor, I was surprised to see that in looking through your finances, but of course for me that's pleasant regardless of the financial situation that you're in, that I see that you don't have audit findings. So that leads me to believe that your finance office is structured and sound, or has continued over time. So or we haven't changed. Right, or we haven't changed auditors and the auditors are complacent. I've worked for places that has happened, and we change auditors, and long and behold, here we are with a ton of audit findings. So just a little thoughts in that area.
Oh, sure, no, thank you for bringing it up. We do change audits. Our legislative council selects our auditors. Obviously, the administrator works with them most and works with helping them to get what they need to review. But we've had, I believe, and team, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 different firms in the last 10, 12 years. And typically, we have our auditors on a 3-year contract with a 1-year extension, and then we go back out to an RFP, and that's done through a public procurement process. And ultimately, our legislative council, our 15-member body, does approve the auditors, and they are the audit managers.
Okay. Well, then I guess it sounds like right now your infrastructure looks good. Did you bring your auditors with you today? I thought you did, right?
Yep, Mr. Capoletti?
Yes, I'm on the line now. Yep.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So I am guessing that from what I've seen with no audit findings, that you have not found any internal control problems, and the financials infrastructure is sound.
Yeah, as far as internal controls and compliance, we write a letter of recommendations every year to the audit committee. So there are those, but as far as the audit, as far as the numbers being accurate and internal controls running properly, we haven't had any findings. I believe our last finding was two years ago in the Board of Finance and the reconciliations of cash. I'm sorry, the Board of Education.
Okay.
And those 2 management letters, I think, were forwarded over either Friday or today. Monday or today.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously so there's no significant findings in the last 2 years, but there are some reportable conditions they're not reportable conditions, but they're conditions that we thought needed to be reported to our audit committee, and that you should have those letters. So I wouldn't say there's no audit findings.
Could you share that with us? We do not have those, Mayor.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank
you. So that I know, for clarity purposes, are you looking for the council's audit committee meeting minutes, or are you looking for the letters that are in the audit?
From the auditor.
Okay.
That was shared with the committee.
Sure.
Perfect.
Sure. We can share that with you. This is Curtis Eatman, Finance Director. We can share that with you. Is this Kim Kimberly?
Yes, thank you. Yes, please.
Yep.
Any other questions from commissioners?
This is Becky Seelman. It's not a question, but a comment and a suggestion. As a pension actuary, I am delighted to see that you are wrestling your pension situation under control. That's a painful process, but the community
Yes,
will
ma'am.
really be better off in the long run for having done that. I did spot one little thing in a footnote in the CAFR that I just wanted as a suggestion to bring to your attention. The footnote says that for the town employees pension plan, valuations are done as of July 1st to calculate the contribution for the fiscal year that starts on that July 1st. So what that means is that you don't know the actuarially determined contribution until maybe midway through the fiscal year. And what the majority of Connecticut municipalities do is instead use each valuation to determine the contribution for the fiscal year that starts 1 year later. And that means that you should know the exact dollar amount of the pension contribution before you start working on the budget for the coming fiscal
Right.
year.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm wondering where they get the number from that they give us, because we get during our budget process that runs from in any typical year by charter from March to May. They give us the number, and I'm wondering now if that's based on the previous year or if it's based on the calendar year or what. I'm gonna have to check with Siegel on that. Because
Or
we've never
maybe
gone
the
into a year
footnote is
and said we don't know.
Yeah, it may just be that the footnote is incorrect, but I'd encourage you to look into that because
Absolutely, that's a big
the
one.
budget process. It's such a big number in the budget, and to know what it is well in advance just eases the whole planning process.
I appreciate that, absolutely.
This is Kate Bush again. What kind of grand list growth are you seeing, if any?
So I wish we had our economic development director on to give a little bit more detail, and so you could hear a different voice. But our ground list growth has been consistent. We have some good development projects that have happened recently. Some higher end apartments that were built on what was a former concrete cylinder plant and empty. It was literally an empty pit with concrete cylinders in it. That have been looked at for different developments for a long time. There are some beautiful apartment buildings that are fully rented with a waiting list, and the developers are interested in doing some more work there. We have some commercial development that's underway with Hammond's First Hotel. We have a couple of motels that we've had, but we haven't had a hotel, and the hotel is probably 80% constructed at this point, and it's right off of the Merritt Parkway. Total ground list has stayed steady. We're in the process of a reval right now, and we're hoping that that'll result in some grand list growth when the reval process is completed, because in the last reval 5 years ago, 2/3 of the town's residential units, round numbers, went down in value in that reval, and if there's some rebound or some stabilization there, that'll give us a larger tax pullback from the grand list.
And how does the college impact you at the university?
That's a whole meeting discussion about that. Try and get but I'll tell you as quick an answer I can. It's certainly a net benefit when it comes to having absent COVID times, let's say, in having 7,000 students and staff members that are here. The university creates jobs. It's an engine not only of commerce, but it's an engine of assistance in a social way as well, in that they will assist the town in different departments with interns and with professors to help us on committees and help us in departments and to help us in projects. And the financial side of it has been challenging from year to year. There have been some years where the university has been more than willing to come and give a voluntary contribution with usually some fanfare and a largely printed check. We tried to deposit both of them, small and the big. It didn't work, unfortunately. And then other years, we've gotten nothing. And frankly, and this is a previous administration, there was years where there was frustration on the university's part that some of their land use requests weren't approved quicker than they were, and that these processes are lengthy. And in those years, sometimes they were not as generous with their funds. Previous to the COVID year, and under the new administration with President Olean, we received a check for $740,000. Curtis, if I'm off on that, please correct me. And we expected to see a bump up from that in our discussions for the fiscal 20 year. And unfortunately, once COVID hit and they responsibly closed campus down and did things early, the positive of the COVID closure from a health standpoint was a negative for them, certainly financially, and they lost out on a lot of money and were not able to give us anything. In this year's fiscal 21 budget, we have $1.6 million less. So last year was $2.1 million. This year there's only $500,000 voluntary contribution line. And so if we get our traditional 750, that has been, I'm sorry, the number has ranged over the last 7-8 years from 0 to 1.3. So if we get the more typical average of 750, then we'll have exceeded our budget estimate that's in the budget this year.
So wait, what's in the budget this year then?
500,000.
Okay, all right.
I'd be surprised if we don't receive at least that.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Not here.
So,
And we're in the essence of time. I know you have to go, Kate. It's
Yeah.
Kim.
Go ahead.
I do think that Mayor, you've started to pull together a contingency plan. You do have some very high risk items within your fiscal year 21 budget. And I just would want to make sure that you have a list of priorities as far as should certain revenue lines do not come to fruition, that you are prepared to take action on whatever that levels of contingency based on the shortfall, so that you don't end this year with another negative fund balance.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And we can work to share that with you in writing, or we can share it with you at a future meeting, whatever the group's preference is. But we've started to dig into that, certainly. And you know, some of it's already in reality and on paper, right, that we can already deal with, and there's some that we're starting to work on and seeing where the first quarter of the year ends.
Okay, so we're probably going to be sending you a letter with, a follow-up letter with other information we're going to be requesting, such as the management letter. So I'd ask commissioners if there's anything that you think of that you want to see from Hamden to before their next visit with us. Please let Bill know.
Okay.
Okay.
And it looks like we're going to ask them to come see us in December.
I think so, because I'd like to see an update on where they stand, get their final numbers for fiscal 20 and how fiscal 21 is going.
Very good.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll have an even better picture to report from that end. That would be something that it certainly would certainly something that we're working hard towards.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and we look forward to working with you and to any suggestions that you have as we move forward.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and your team.
And looking forward to meeting you in person, hopefully at some point.
I know. That would be nice.
It'll be nice. Kim and
Have
Bill,
a
do we have any other business?
I do not believe so. Kate, Bill?
Yep.
No.
Okay. All right, then do we have
Need
a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Diane?
Do
Second,
we have a
Kim.
second? Okay, all those in favor?
Does that background sound have anything to do with our meeting?
Aye.
All right, anybody opposed? I didn't think so. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.